Okay, trigonometry is the study of measurements of triangles. We would do three trig ratios there: cosine, sine, and tangent. These equations relate the measures of one angle in a right triangle to a ratio of two sides. And you have to make sure to change your calculator into degrees. And don't forget, if y'all want this calculator at home, you can download it on any Android phone. It's Wabbit Emu. And you could also download it onto a computer. I'm not sure about tablets, but you can always try it out and see if it works. But you can get this exact same calculator that I use right here. So you need to change your calculator because it does auto default to radians, and we need it in degrees. So you press the mode button. So on your calculator, the mode button is right here, and what we need is this degree highlighted. So most calculators look like this when they are defaulted, and the radians is black, so you need to arrow down to radian and go over to degree and then hit enter, and that will make it be in degrees. So this is the most important part, and you need to check it every single time that you start doing trig functions. These are given to you on your star chart. So what it looks like on a triangle is, if you are focusing on angle A, this will still be your hypotenuse. It will always be your hypotenuse. But then we have adjacent and opposite, and adjacent means next to. So if we're focusing on this angle, adjacent is right next to it. So this one is adjacent. And then opposite is across from that angle. So this is opposite. But if we're focusing on B, our hypotenuse is still in the same spot, but the opposite and adjacent change, because remember I told you adjacent is next to. So if we're focusing on this angle, then that makes this adjacent. And then it makes this side opposite. So on this first problem, we're writing three trig equations for both acute angles. So if we're focusing on 53, we have to do the sine of 53, the cosine of 53, and the tangent of 53. And our ratios can be remembered by SOHCAHTOA. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. 5 is always going to be your hypotenuse. For whenever we're focusing on the 53-degree angle, the 3 is your adjacent because it's right next to that angle. So this one's adjacent, and then the opposite is 4. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse is 4 over 5. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so adjacent over hypotenuse is 3 over 5. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent is 4 over 3. Okay, then whenever we focus on 37, 5 is still our hypotenuse, that's not going to change, but the opposite and adjacent switch, because 4 is now what is next to 37. So this is my adjacent side, and then across from that is my opposite side. So 3 is now my opposite. So the sine of 37, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. opposite over hypotenuse is 3 over 5. Cosine of 37. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent over hypotenuse is 4 over 5. And then the tangent of 37. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent is 3 over 4. When we're actually working problems, if we're looking at 38, the very first thing that we need to do is figure out what our two givens that they give us. Are they opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? So since 17 is right next to this angle, that will be my adjacent. And since x is across, that will be my opposite. Then you have to see which function uses opposite and adjacent. And so for this one, it's our tangent function. So tangent of 38 is equal to opposite over adjacent. So opposite over adjacent is x over 17. To move the 17 out of the denominator, since we're dividing by 17, we multiply both sides by 17. And this cancels. So what's left is 17 times the tangent of 38. That's what is equal to x. So we need to put this part in our calculator to figure out what x is. Okay, if you're ever stuck here, you need to quit. So we need to go to the main screen. Anytime you get stuck anywhere, you just need to hit quit. So it's second mode in order to quit. So it's 17 times, and then tangent is right here. So the tangent of 38, and you don't have to close the parentheses if you don't want to. And that means that this side of our triangle is 13.28. So this is 13.28. For our next problem, remember the very first thing you do, you have to recognize opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. The 35 is right next to my angle, so that's adjacent, and that x is where my hypotenuse is. So you have to see which one uses adjacent and hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse is right here. That is our cosine function. Our cosine of 50 is the adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse is 35 over x. And anytime that you have x in the denominator, all you have to do is flip these. So the x will go where the cosine is, and the cosine will now go where x is. So they just flip-flop. And then you put this into your calculator. So 35 divided by the cosine of 50. So our hypotenuse for this triangle is 54.45. And you can use these for your special right triangles. So if you go up, this is what we did special right triangle day. So if you have trouble with your special right triangles, you can most definitely use trig functions to do it. If we're focusing on this 60, 2 is our adjacent. Over here is our hypotenuse. Let's call it x. That means this is our opposite. Let's call it y. So for x, if we're using adjacent and hypotenuse, adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So the cosine of our angle 60 is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, so 2 over x. Remember, if the x is in the denominator, we flip-flop. So x is equal to cosine 60 all under 2. So 2 divided by the cosine of 60, and it should be 4. And it is, so that worked. So this should be 4. And if you wanted to work the other one, then you would have adjacent and opposite, and that's tangent. So the tangent of 60 is equal to opposite over adjacent, y over 2. And then this 2, you multiply both sides by it to make it go away. So 2 times the tangent of 60, which it does give you a decimal. Remember, I did want y'all to try to put your stuff in square root form. But the key is that you know 30, 60, 90 is always square roots of 3. So if you divide it by the square root of 3, then it's 2. So this side is really 2 square roots of 3. So it's whichever one makes more sense to you. We do need to do the next flap to know what you do if you're missing your angle. So when you're looking for your angle, you press the second button and then the appropriate trig function and then the ratio. So I showed this example right here of what a calculator should look like. So this one. Okay, so 17 is right next to this is adjacent, and then across from there, that is the opposite. So the one that uses opposite over adjacent is tangent. So the tangent of x is opposite over adjacent, which is 25 over 17. So we cannot actually take the tangent of x. So to do that, you do what's called the inverse function. So it looks like this in your calculator. To do that, you press second and then tan. So second tan 25 divided by 17. And this is an angle measure, so it gives us 55.78, but angle measures always need to be rounded to the nearest whole number. So 55.7 is really 56 degrees. Okay, so for this problem, if we're looking at this angle, 32 is our hypotenuse and 14 is opposite. So opposite over hypotenuse is sine. The sine of x is opposite over adjacent, so opposite over hypotenuse, so 14 over 32. So you have to use the inverse function. It's 25.9, and remember, round to the nearest whole number, so it's 26 degrees. Okay, so this is what a word problem would look like. We need to draw that triangle. They're always going to be right triangles. And it tells you that B is the 90-degree angle, so this has to be B. It doesn't matter where you put A or C. Either way, the answer will still work out. And it tells you if sine of A is 4/5, what is the tangent of A? So we're focusing on A this whole time. And sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite of here is where our 4 would go, and our hypotenuse is 5. And it wants to know the tangent of A. And remember, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we need opposite and adjacent, and we do not have our adjacent. We need to figure that one out. So you can either use the Pythagorean theorem. So x squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Some of you may be able to recognize that this is the Pythagorean triple and could know right away what number goes here, in which case you would not have to do the Pythagorean theorem. But if you do not recognize that it's a Pythagorean triple, then you need to complete your Pythagorean theorem. So x squared is 9. We need to take the square root of both. And x is 3. So remember, this is a 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triple. Since the side is 3. And remember, since we're looking at this angle, this is adjacent, this is always my hypotenuse, and this is my opposite. So my tangent of A is opposite over adjacent, so 4 over 3 is my answer. Draw your next triangle. Again, it tells you B needs to be your 90-degree angle, so you can put A and C anywhere. And then it says if the tangent of A is 6 over 8, what is the cosine of C? So we're actually focusing on two separate angles this time. So let's just deal with A first, and that's the tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. Right next to this angle is our adjacent, across from it is our opposite, and then this is always going to be our hypotenuse. So opposite over adjacent, that means our opposite is 6, and then our adjacent is 8. And those numbers will not change. This side will always be 6, this side will always be 8. What will change is the opposite and adjacent part and what angle we're focusing on. So it needs to know the cosine of C. To figure that out, we need to look at this angle. So I'm going to erase all this red. And I told you that the 6 and the 8 will not change. So the 6 now becomes our adjacent. The 8 is now our opposite, and this is always going to be our hypotenuse. And cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we need to know the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and we do not know the hypotenuse. That's what we need to figure out. Now again, this is a Pythagorean triple, so if you recognize it, you could just write in your answer. But if you don't, then you need to do Pythagorean theorem. So it is a Pythagorean triple. It's our 3, 4, 5 triangle just multiplied by 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8, and 5 times 2 is 10. That makes our hypotenuse 10. So our cosine of C is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse is 6 over 10. And you don't have to reduce these. You can just leave it as 6 over 10. Lastly, we're going to fill in all of the angles and sides using this triangle. You can actually do it more than just the way that I'm going to tell you to do it. But depending on which angle you want to focus on and what order of sides you want to find. But that is purely up to you. So angle D is 36 degrees. Angle F is 90 degrees. To find our third angle, all angles of a triangle have to add up to be 180. So 180 minus 90 minus 36 is 54. Yeah. So this should be 54 degrees. And this is also 54 degrees. So it doesn't matter which one of these angles you use. I'm going to use 36. So if I use 36, this side over here, we're going to make it X, and that's our adjacent side. This side over here, we're going to make it Y. This will always be our hypotenuse. And this side over here is our opposite side. So if we're trying to solve these, the very first thing, we're always going to use our 5 because it's what's given to us and it will give you the most accurate. And if we want to solve for X first, that means that we have opposite and adjacent. So opposite and adjacent is our tangent. So tangent of 36 is opposite over adjacent, so 5 over x. Remember, anytime you have x in the denominator, these two flip-flop. So x is equal to the tangent of 36 all under 5. So that means that this side, df, is 6.88. Or 6.9, whichever. Also, we already know FE is 5. And then lastly, we still need to use our opposite side and our y. So it's opposite and hypotenuse, which is sine. So the sine of 36 is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, 5 over y. And these two flip-flop. So 5 divided by the sine of 36. .51. And don't forget, if you had any questions, make sure you write them down so that you remember to ask them tomorrow.